Hello everybody, welcome back to Representing the World. My name's Peter Knight. In this session we're going to be talking about all sorts of things: music, poetry, art, glaciers. What we're really interested in is different ways of looking at the world around us. Geography is all about noticing what's in the landscape, what's in the world all around us, and the more we notice, the more interesting and the more complex the world becomes. Both science and art, and geography is involved with both of those, both science and art are ways of noticing, ways of engaging with the world around us and trying to make sense of the complexity that is present in the world. So for this session we're going to have a series of 3 separate little videos in which we're going to explore some of this material about different ways of looking at the world through art, science, and we'll use glaciers and other landscapes that you're familiar with. We'll use those as examples to show how we can do that. Now, one of the reasons that so many people enjoy geography is that there are so many different ways of doing it. You can be an artist, you can be a scientist, you can be a politician, you can be an engineer. You can do geography in all of those different ways. And this module is specifically about those different ways of looking at the world, different ways of representing the world, and how we need to represent the world differently in different situations, how we need to look at the world differently in different situations. This particular lecture is designed to try to stretch your impression, stretch your view of what geography can be and so the different ways that we can do geography or be geographers. In third year there's a module, Inspirational Landscape, GEG 30014, that I run, and if you enjoy this kind of way of thinking about seeing the world in different ways, then Inspirational Landscapes is a third year module that gives you an opportunity to carry forward some of the ideas that we'll be looking at in this session. So I'm going to start today's session by using glaciers that you might think, when you see me, a physical geographer, you probably think of me as, and you think, well, he's going to talk about glaciers, this is going to be science stuff. Well, I'm going to try and show that even a traditionally physical geography or physical sciences topic doesn't need to be treated just in a physical sciences kind of way. And I guess the big point for this session, the main point for this session, is just to say it's okay to invent your own ways of doing geography. There isn't just one way of looking at the world, so therefore there isn't just one way of doing geography or being a geographer. So let's have a think about some different ways that we can do that. Now, it's tempting when I'm sat here in my geography shed talking to you about glaciers, and I see these pictures here with the basal shear stress at the underneath of an ice sheet and the atomic structure of ice. I could embark now on a 24-hour marathon lecture about glacier science. There is plenty of science to do on glaciers. We could do that. But now isn't the time. Most of you, I'm sure, don't really want me to do that, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say, well, we'll take for granted the glacier science. We know about that. But what else can we do? What other ways of looking at glaciers are there? And over the last 5 years or so, up until a couple of years ago, I was working on this new book, Glacier, Nature and Culture, which was commissioned specifically to focus on the non-science aspects of glaciers and to say, well, look, here's the science, yeah, we can do science on glaciers, but look, we've encountered glaciers in lots of other different ways. Artists look at glaciers, engineers look at glaciers, tourists go and look at glaciers, poets think about glaciers and write about glaciers. So where does all that go? Does that belong in geography, or is geography only interested in the science? And obviously I'm sat here talking to you because I think, no, the geography includes those other approaches to looking at the natural environment as well. Science isn't the only way for us to engage with the natural environment. Now, when I was working on that book, I contacted all sorts of different people. Basically, whenever I saw anyone using the word glacier, I got in touch with them and said, what are you talking about? What are you thinking about? And one of the recurring themes that came up talking to all these different people was the idea that we can use glacier as a metaphor, and glacier or desert or volcano or any other aspect of the physical landscape is kind of part of a shared symbolic language or an iconography. If I say to you, oh, it was glacial, as it is indeed today, it's glacial in here, you know what I mean. Or if I say, oh, it was moving like a glacier, you'll kind of know I'm not meaning it was necessarily whizzing along, it was going slowly. We associate certain things with certain physical phenomena. And there is a musician called Ned Self, and he produced this album It's kind of Hawaiian steel guitar music, but he called his album Glaciers Come, Glaciers Go. And I wrote to him and I said, well, what are you thinking? What's the thinking behind calling your album, naming your album after glaciers? And we had a chat, and he said, we all tend to inflate whatever our current problem or obsession or infatuation might be into a giant megalith that seems to be forever unchanging and all-consuming, when in fact it will soon melt and fade and transform into the next thing that will occupy our thoughts. And he said, I felt glaciers were a perfect metaphor for that process, since they're staggeringly large and permanent when you're standing at the base of one, but over the course of time they advance, they retreat, and are in constant flux. The key, of course, is one's perception of time. Humans seem programmed to dwell mainly in the now, but a slight step back into a geological, cosmic time frame quickly reveals the folly of whatever seemingly insurmountable problem we might face at the moment. So what he's doing there is saying, well, here's life, here's glaciers. Ooh, look, we can use glaciers as an analogue, as a metaphor to describe some other aspect of the world around us, some other aspect of our life. And that opens up the door to artists, poets, etc., to use glaciers in that way as part of this shared metaphorical language. So landscapes, glaciers, volcanoes, deserts, rivers, whatever you want to use, landscapes can represent things beyond themselves, things beyond landscape. So here's an example. This is a very famous painting by Lauren Harris, a Canadian artist, in 1930, and it was called Greenland Mountains. Now, the painting was mislabelled in the art gallery and put away into storage. And some years later, the Canadian government were looking for a painting to use on a stamp to represent the archetypal, stereotypical or archetypal Canadian landscape. They wanted something to represent their national landscape. And they went and looked to see what they had in the catalogue, and they found this painting. But it wasn't labelled Greenland Mountains in the catalogue. It had been mistakenly labelled Bylot Island. And so they thought, here's a painting of Bylot Island. That's in Canada. It's a great landscape. We'll use that on our stamp. So for many years, Canada had a national stamp showing part of its national landscape heritage, but it wasn't actually its own landscape. They'd accidentally used a bit of landscape from a different country. So that's a little bit of a side story on that one. But the key idea here is that, landscape can mean something more than just, it's some ice on some rocks. It can be part of your national cultural identity as well as that. So landscape can be a really important thing in people's ways of thinking about the world and about their place in the world, and their context or their framework within the natural environment. So how do we see, how do we look at the world, how do we represent the world? That's what this module is all about. And geography is all about exploring. It's all about seeing from new viewpoints, noticing new things, discovering things, and then sharing those discoveries, representing, showing the world from your new viewpoint to people who've previously seen it from different points of view. So our aim is to observe, to record, and to report what we see in the world. And on the science side of geography, we very much would say that we're observing, recording and reporting the reality of what's really in the world. But we have to distinguish between, if there is an objective reality, then we have to distinguish between what actually exists in the world, which I may or may not be able to see all of, what I can then observe of that, which I might observe accurately, I might observe completely, or probably only partially, and then how effectively I can communicate even what I have observed. And then by the time I'm telling somebody about what I've seen in the world or what I think about the world, there can be a very big difference there between what actually existed, what I was able to see of that, and how well I was able to communicate that. And we don't necessarily even want to represent everything. If I see everything in the world and just give it all to you, well, that's not really much help because you could have seen it yourself. What's important in science and in art is that selectivity, choosing what to notice. That's a really important phrase, choosing what to notice in the world around you, making decisions about what's important, and that's central to how we see and represent the world. It's all about choosing what to notice. You don't want everything, you want a selection from everything that makes a point, or does a job, or shows something that we hadn't otherwise noticed. The problem then arises of, well, how do we see clearly? I implied before there might be a reality. I may or may not see that reality clearly even before I start communicating it. And the problem is partly that there are more things in the environment than our physical senses can recognise. So we see visible wavelengths, but we don't see infrared, ultraviolet. I don't see gravity, for example. It's harder to observe some things than other things. I can't see magnetism unless I have a bit of equipment, a compass or whatever, to measure the magnetism. Landscape is not only physical. There are emotional landscapes, there are metaphysical landscapes, there are things that we can't as easily engage with as my ice axe, my rocks or whatever. Landscape is complicated and there are things that we can't see. So we need to somehow translate from that reality to what we're talking about, what we're representing. You think, for example, of a globe. So here's the world on the globe. If I want to translate that into a flat sheet of paper, well, then I start worrying about map projections. We've talked about map projections a lot in this module already. So that's a problem of going from the reality to the representation of that reality. It isn't very straightforward. And if we're trying to represent things that aren't even visible in the first place, well, then there are additional problems there. And we need to remember that what we see depends only partly on what is actually there. We don't see everything that is actually there, and we impose additional things on top of what is actually there by our viewing of it and by our trying to represent, how we try to represent it. So we do have issues about what we choose to notice and how we actually do then look at the world around us. And I just want to finish this first video. There's going to be 3 videos in this series. Just break the material up into easily digestible chunks for you. But I want to finish this first video with an exercise. And it's very simple. You can do it anywhere. If you don't have a window, you can just look around your room. But assuming you've got a window, I've just put a photograph here of Kiel, which I know most of you aren't going to be at Kiel right now, but this is a view that you could have if you just stepped outside of your door in the department of Kiel and looked at part of the campus. What can you see there? You can use that photograph if you want, or you can look out of your window wherever you actually are right now, or you can just look around your shed, look around your room, and tell me, what do you see? What do you see in that view that you have out of your window or around your room? Get a pen and paper or start typing. Make me a list. Make me a list of what you can see. I want you to take a little bit of time over that. Do this as an activity and take it seriously. And then when we come back in the second video, we'll develop that based on what you've actually done, and we'll then move it forward to think of some new things that we might, some new ways that we can look at landscape, and some new things that we might therefore see. So have a cup of tea, have some biscuits, take a break, try that exercise, and we'll pick up from right here in the second video in this series later on.